We have Duff Johnson here with us today. Duff managed the process of developing PDF UA from its inception in 2004 and is presently the ISO project leader for ISO 14289, which is PDF UA. And he's also the executive director of the PDF Association and is an independent consultant. And with that, really, I'm just going to hand it over to Duff and let him share more with you.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move directly to my slides if I can. And please let me know, is it displaying them?
Yep.
All right, so, it's going to show video at the same time, huh? Crazy. All right, we'll try that. So I'm here to talk to you about a little bit about PDF UA and why, and try and explain in my own words what I think to be the most important sentence in PDF UA and its implications for testing, for remediating, for creating accessible content. And I'm happy to take questions or interruptions at any time, but if you want to wait to the end, that's fine too. That's, whatever anybody really wants to do is okay with me. So I will just rattle through here a couple. This is basically the area I'm going to cover here, a little bit about the standard itself, its relationship with WCAG 2.1, why we care about PDF UA, or certainly why the PDF industry does, and why it's, I think, useful for our users to care about PDF UA, if not in the details, if instead the actual conformance with it. And then we'll talk about what I believe is the most important sentence in PDF UA, take it apart a little bit and understand its ramifications, and in particular where accessibility checkers stop. And they stop pretty early, really, in the process of determining whether or not a PDF file, certainly whether or not it conforms to PDF UA, and also, as you'll see, that they stop kind of early in terms of whether or not that file is really accessible. So a little bit about me. That's the pre-transplant photo. I don't look so good today. I founded a document imaging service bureau in the mid-90s and started in like 2001. We started producing tagged PDF files, and that's how, just after 2 or 3 years of doing that, we were pretty frustrated by the fact that there were no standards for tagging PDF files in any way, shape, or form, or notable in the industry. So I got involved with an organization that actually prompted, the original idea was from Adobe Systems themselves, that got involved with the organization that was started off attempting to develop best practices for tagging PDF. And the idea, because it was located in a standards development program, kind of snowballed into the idea of, well, why not an ISO standard to formalize the discussion and certainly to create a technical body of information about what was necessary to make an accessible PDF. So as you can see from this long and boring list, I do a bunch of stuff in the PDF industry. So I'm all the time talking to PDF developers and consultants and implementers and also users increasingly about their experience of PDF and what the format needs to do, what its potential is in the ecosystem, in the document ecosystem. So briefly about PDF UA, it's the ISO standard for universally accessible. That's where the UA comes from, universally accessible PDF technology. It's an exceptionally technical document. It's only really intended, I should say, really intended for technical users, technical developers, product managers, and so on. And I suppose when we did it, we kind of knew all along that unless we did a lot more work to explain it in additional documents, it would itself become this kind of thing that people would want to read and download and even pay the money for and get. And I'll be honest, I often hear from folks who are pretty disappointed if they do ever get their hands on it, because it's not written in English at all, really. It's a bunch of extremely highly technical specifications having to do exclusively with the PDF syntax and the PDF format. About a third of the bulk of the document are just specifications for fonts. You won't find fonts discussed in WCAG at all, right? So what is this stuff? And in a lot of ways, I regret that we didn't put just as much energy into generating a document that would instead refer to PDF UA, but where the actual standard that the users would think of as a standard would be something with a lot more practical advice. But that's really what the PDF Association is for, more than it is the ISO working groups, which are not about best practice development per se. And so that's a distinction I'm happy to get into if you're interested later. So PDF UA is not just about a conforming PDF file. It's also about a conforming PDF processor and a PDF and assistive technology. Those two parts of the specification, those last two large clauses, most everybody ignores them. That's too bad, because those clauses really point the way to, if there were readers and other software that implemented those clauses, then the kind of natural draw on the developers who make the software that creates PDF UA files or PDF files in general would be a lot stronger. And I'll say now what I say really to everybody who's interested in knowing what they can do to help with PDF accessibility. And I will answer that. I'd say, grab your keyboard and go to the relevant website of the vendor who manufactures the software that you use to process PDF files, to read them, to view them, to create them, most importantly, and demand better software that actually uses PDF UA, not just from the point of view of creating PDF files, but also of consuming them. So PDF UA. So as I've said, it's highly technical. It's all sort of a inside baseball subject, frankly, for developers, and it has now become in a lot of ways, it's, since the federal government referred to it, people have said, what's PDF UA? I have to have that, must download it, must conform with it. And yes, but really the conformance with it is something that the developers should be doing, and users should be simply getting to use the tools. So part of what I'm going to do here is talk about how some of these complexities are arising. So PDF UA, what's its relationship with WCAG, right? So this slide puts it in extremely straightforward or simple terms, but where I'm trying to maximize the understanding the distinction between the things. They're actually, both of these documents are extremely well aligned with each other, in the sense that PDF is all about making PDF content accessible, and WCAG 2.1 is all about accessible web content. And PDF content is web content. It's not HTML, but it's a first-class citizen of the web. But yet it's a different technology than web technology. So the two documents are about very much the same thing, but they do differ in a number of details. WCAG doesn't include some of the PDF-specific elements. And of course, PDF is only concerned with PDF. So PDF UA exclusively about PDF content, and it's got rules very much, as I've said earlier, for developers, and it's really not speaking to end users, to remediators, to authors at all. The hope was the intended audience for PDF UA are the people who make the software that end users, creators, authors use. WCAG, as I've said, rooted in web content, but is intended to be generally applicable elsewhere. It's a general purpose technology, or a concept for accessible technology. It's supposed to apply for Word files and PDF files and whatever else, right? So why is that this? What's the distinction there? And I've tried to indicate in a very high level what the significance is of this distinction. WCAG includes a lot of information about the production, the actual authoring and creation of accessible content. And PDF UA really doesn't. The premise of PDF UA is, here's a PDF file, and it has text, and it has images of some kind or another, because they all do. So what do you need to do to make these text and these images accessible? That's a very different orientation from how to make accessible content, and then representing it simply requires that you get out of the way of the accessible features of that content. Now, PDF The reason it's oriented this way is that, for the most time, and still in most cases, only about 15-20% of PDF files are tagged at all. And so adding accessibility to a PDF became a standard kind of way in which people thought about it, as opposed to building a web page from zero and making sure it's accessible, and where the authoring decisions and the accessibility questions are much more closely related. So why care about PDF UA? In other words, why not just use WCAG, right? It covers all technologies, and that's kind of true. But web pages and websites are not the same as PDF documents, and so there are distinctive considerations to be had. You can't really get too badly lost in terms of fonts on the web. You can perhaps, but then that becomes a matter of broken encodings on that web page where you call for a font and you can't get it, so there's some substitution that occurs. And in PDF, a missing font could create an unrecoverable problem in principle. But so WCAG 2.1 and PDF are they're not the same thing. They work smoothly together, but WCAG doesn't really speak to certain aspects of PDF technology. PDF technology certainly doesn't claim to make any of the sort of large scale kind of give any of the large scale advice about authoring that WCAG does. One other big difference between them is that PDF UA includes this conformance flag. And one thing that's distinctive about UA is that the flag itself is a part of accessibility it's a part of conformance with the standard. That's different, because when you think about it, if you take a PDF UA file and you simply don't have the flag on it, it's no less accessible than a file that includes the flag. That's actually, I think, one of the reasons why when they did WCAG, they did not include a mandatory conformance flag. They simply, there's a optional conformance statement that you can make that pertains to it, but it's not machine readable. So you can't make software that goes and scans a website and can report on the pages and go, oh yes, that page says it's accessible, and that page says it is, and that page doesn't say it's accessible. So now we know what to do, right? PDF UA, though, creates that opportunity. The UA flag is a claim by the author or the remediator that the file has been made accessible. And it's a very strong claim. It's a gold standard. Because getting PDF UA right is a lot of work, for particularly on more and more complex files. So there are, I've heard of, and we anticipated this would probably happen. There are cases in the world where people run like the auto tagger, and then they run the Acrobat checker, and they will decide that if they make the Acrobat checker happy, well, why doesn't this thing let me put on this PDF UA flag so I can have that? Well, the UA checker, the checker doesn't get you to UA conformance. It's not just a question of whether or not it will add that flag. There are real differences between them. So let's keep going. So getting to what's the most important sentence in PDF UA. I believe it's in paragraph, and hopefully, in fact, you all don't have the document because you probably hate me for it, and I wouldn't blame you. In paragraph 7.1, or paragraph 2 of section 7.1, really doesn't matter where it is. It contains this magic sentence: content shall be marked in the structure tree with semantically appropriate tags in a logical reading order. When people say, what would you compare that to in WCAG? I usually would say success criterion 1.3.1, 1.3.1, which is info and relationships. And honestly, 1.3.1 is the most important success criterion, I believe, or one of the most. There are many important ones in WCAG 2.1. And here's more or less the PDF equivalent. Let's take it apart a little bit here. So it's not obvious, and understanding this sentence is kind of, when we unpack it, begin to understand why why this very technical, dry technical document is why it's regrettable in a sense that it became like this reference, because it's not, these things are not obvious from reading it, and they involve a lot of background in PDF technology. So first of all, content. Content comes in two flavors in PDF, right? There's, believe it or not, real content. That's its actual name, real content, and then artifacts. Real content is defined in the PDF specification as the stuff that authors intend to be there. Okay. And artifacts are the whole world of stuff that the author didn't necessarily intend to be there, but are simply there as a matter of pagination or of a matter of flow. These are the rule lines and the page headers and the footers and so on. The things, repetitive elements, graphical elements that don't have any semantic meaning in the document. So content, the real content, not artifacts. That's the stuff that shall be marked in the structure tree. Shall be is the strongest terminology we have in ISO standards, or the word shall really. Shall means you absolutely have to do it. If you fail to do it, you will not conform. You cannot conform if your situation does not agree with a so-called shall statement or shall requirement. It's a hard requirement. We have three kinds of requirements in ISO standards. Shall, you gotta do it. Should, it's extremely strongly recommended. And may, which is you're permitted to do it. And if they see a may, they expect that other people should be able to handle what it is that they're doing. That's the detail. So, okay, so we have the real content, shall be marked in the structure tree. And you all, I believe, according to what Peter's told me, you all know exactly what that means. You know what tagging, you know what the structure tree is. It's that organization scheme for tags in a PDF file. It's a series of pointers to or containers of the elements of content on a PDF page. Semantically appropriate, probably the single, if I had to, this sentence is certainly the most important, and these two words are the most important words in the sentence. Semantically appropriate, and I'm going to get into this a little more later, boils down to the difference between tagging that thing as a table or as a figure, or as a heading versus a paragraph, or as a list instead of a paragraph, right? Semantically appropriate means we have these structure elements that say something about this chunk of content, and UA requires that they shall be, in fact, marked with semantically appropriate tags. And the logical reading order specifically means that exactly what it says. The order in which these tags come, not content, but the order in which the tags appear is what's relevant from an accessibility point of view. And that's important in PDF because unlike HTML, the tags and the content don't necessarily happen in the same order in a PDF. There are good reasons for that, but they make life complicated from an accessibility point of view. Next slide. What are semantics? So you're familiar with the tags in PDF. You have P tags and heading tags and table and list body and so on. And as you can tell, they kind of look like, or they seem to look like, except strangely different cases. They're kind of similar to HTML tags, and they were originally developed from, borrowed from HTML tags. Then few were added, and some aren't really represented there. And there are other more PDF-like ways of doing some of these things. Those differences are part of what keeps our life complicated in the PDF space. But PDF tags are not the same as HTML tags. They're just closely related. And as in HTML, PDF's tags denote the document's semantics, the significance of each element of content as it relates to other elements. Semantics are typically expressed as markup. That is to say, there's standardized indicators of the author's intent, right? So this is really another way of saying it's very similar to HTML in this regard. And they're simple cases of markup: paragraph tags, table tags, t-head, and so on and so forth. Artifacts, as I've said, they're not part of the semantic content of the document, and they're the page numbers and headers. I imagine we might talk about this a little bit later. These are elements of content which are not intended to be read in line in the document. You don't really want to. Well, I'm going to get to that. It's part of my example later. I'm stepping on my own slides. So in order for semantic structures to be accessible, they have to be correctly ordered. And this is the correct ordering we've had before. It's not okay to have one paragraph that follows another be represented in some different order, right? Or it's not okay that if you have a page that continues on a page after an advertisement in a magazine, it would be incorrect to order things so that the text that completes on the page, on one page, then starts reading the advertisement before it continues on the next page of the article. That would not be semantically correct because the advertisement is not part of the semantics of the article. Okay. The key factors in PDF accessibility. So and this is all implied again by this sentence that I've discussed earlier. The first thing we have to do in contemplating a PDF page is to distinguish between real and artifact content. Okay. So over here is the stuff that the author intends for you to read, and the artifact content is the stuff that is the stuff that a machine uses to lay this material out on a page, to create lines and little breaks that help the page structure visually, and things like page numbers and page headers, footers. So accessibility checkers, though, can only do a certain amount to deal with artifacts, inappropriate semantics, and invalid ordering of tags. In fact, in most cases, accessibility checkers can't tell you anything about these things at all. So the most important attributes of accessible content, the most important questions that are addressed in accessibility terms, are actually not really part of something that any checker can do for you. I'll give you some examples. Well, okay, the examples are coming up. Well, let's take a look at these. No, they're here. Examples of inappropriate semantics. Okay, the tagged page number, order, and I'm going to go through these as in these following slides here. But these are cases where inappropriate semantics are something that and these are important key point here, are something that accessibility checker really will not characteristically find. It's of course possible to develop an accessibility checker that does a better job. You might find one that's deliberately, attempts to identify cases of page numbers which are tagged, and then says something about it or even fixes it automatically. But for the most part, current generation accessibility checkers don't do this stuff. So page numbers, first of all, hopefully this is large enough to see. I realize I could have done a better job of making it bigger. Oops. Oops. Oh dear, I just shut down my file. There we go. Is it displaying the correct file? Hopefully you're seeing the right file, are you? You still seeing page
no,
numbers?
No, we're just seeing your tools right now.
Okay, I blew it. Got it. Okay. Yeah, I fumbled it. Okay. You're seeing it now, right? Page numbers.
Page numbers, yep.
Yeah. Page numbers, they're artifacts. They're not real content. How do we know that? Because the machine added them itself. No author intends, and let's take the example here. I think this is from King Lear, or no, this is Hamlet. No author intended, or Shakespeare did not intend, that the AT user should read out of out of frame one colleagued with a dream, right? The page number is not supposed to be part of the real text. So that's a good tip off that it's an artifact. There's no accessibility checker who will find that for you that I'm aware of today. What should you do with page numbers instead? Well, number one, they should be artifacts. And number two, that you should indicate page numbers using the PDF's page label feature. It may be called page numbering in your application. You make the page numbers, as I said, you make sure they're artifacts. You mark them as pagination artifacts, which is a detail. But basically, you go ahead and add the page labels, and this makes the page numbers fully accessible to AT users without having to include them in the structure of in the document itself. So an appropriate usage application of page numbers which in a way that's consistent for the user, but without scrambling the text as it flows from page to page. So yeah.
On that one, when you're saying to use the software to add the page numbers, you're specifically saying to use the PDF software, is that right? Like if they were making a source file in Word or Google Docs or something, then converting to PDF, is it better to have the page numbers added after the PDF conversion, or to have those page numbers added in that source file to begin with?
So let's take the example of Word. It depends upon the source software. In general terms, if you've placed your page numbers in a footer of a document as opposed to in the body of the document, then, and if you use software such as I believe Microsoft's default export to PDF functionality, or Adobe Acrobat's export to PDF functionality from Word, will go ahead and ignore the footer, or I should say mark the footer content as an artifact. Right. But if you instead created the PDF from Word by printing to PDF, and then adding the tags afterwards, then you're not using the converter at all to make that PDF, and the page numbers probably will be tagged.
Gotcha.
So it's very, very dependent upon. In general terms, it's a very good idea to use the native process to create a PDF file, and ideally to make the tagged PDF. You never have more information about the document than you do at the moment when the file is created. So the source application, if it's leveraged to use its structural information to supply the document with content, that's really what you want.
Great. Yep. Thanks.
So let's look at next example. Let's look at lists here. So I've used kind of fake, or what we call pseudo tags, to represent PDF structure here for the purposes of this example. Here's an ordered list where we would have a list item and then a label. Okay, within a list item can be these elements such as a label and an L body, which I'm sure you're already familiar with. So in this list, that represented at the top here, we've got, it's very obviously, and I've left out the attribute stuff with a list. I've zeroed in right here on the list items themselves, and we have a label and then L body, so now we can clearly see that the first list item talks about 23 pounds of rice, and the second list item talks about 16 pounds of corn. If we did not include these label tags, which are semantic elements that allow us to distinguish this one from the rest of this content, we might be stuck with a list item that reads 123 pounds of rice and 216 pounds of corn. Or it would, as far as an AT is, many different AT are concerned. You can't rely upon the fact that there may or may not be a space, any kind of a space indicated between the label and the L body in order to clearly distinguish the semantics of the list numbering from the contents of the list item, which are very distinct from the list numbering. But again, accessibility checkers, most of them, will be perfectly satisfied. They'll actually be perfectly satisfied if you just use LI. They'll also be perfectly satisfied if you just use an L body underneath an LI. And of course, they will also be very satisfied, but if you use label and L body under an LI, but unfortunately, they won't give you the points that you deserve for that, because that's the right way to do it, right? Even if ATs are doing this or that particular AT does a bad job of it, in general terms, this is the only way to give ATs the opportunity to express the information consistently in a way that is sensible to the end user. A related example, one that makes it perhaps even clearer, is a definition list. Now, HTML and PDF have very different ideas about how to design a list. In HTML, you literally have different list types. You have ordered lists, unordered lists, and definition lists. In PDF, these things are handled by a list attribute on the list itself. But in this case, but that's important. But what I'm getting at here is what's important in terms of the tagging. And we can clearly see in this particular example for this list, the first definition is for the word tag. What does tag do? It makes content accessible. So here we had the definition in the label, and then the term in the label, and then a definition makes content accessible. And likewise in the following list item, the term is content, and the definition is object on a page, okay? But if you didn't include these label elements, tag structure element used to make content accessible, okay, that might very well be the first list item in the list. And the second list item in the list might be content object on a page. But I don't even know if it's a definition list or not at this stage. All I know is that somebody gave me a list with 2 items in it. One of them says tag structure element used to make content accessible, and the other says content object on a page. And it's not very good English, and I didn't hear any distinction between the term and the definition, so I don't know what it means. But again, an accessibility checker won't show this, won't show you this problem. So another key thing that accessibility checkers aren't very good at explaining is how important it is that you tag for semantics and not for encoding. Oh, what does he mean by that, right? So illustrations, and this screenshot here that I'm showing is kind of an example. It's not a very good one, but it's an example. Is an example of an illustration comprised of vector graphics. Could be also little raster images too. Could be photos. Could be little lines. Whatever you'd like. In this case, vector graphics, a combination of vector and raster graphics. There's often in text in these diagrams and charts and flowed charts and graphs and what have you. And it doesn't necessarily imply that you have to tag that text, even though PDF UA says tag all the text. What it really means is tag all the text that's supposed to be represented as text. And if it's supposed to be represented as a figure, then you tag it that way instead. So this is perhaps a better example than what I've got here, and I see this when I'm back in the day quite often, will be that there'd be a file with a table in it, and the table would have something with a table that bothered the auto tagger in Acrobat or in some other tool. And it came along, and instead of looking at the table and seeing a table and deciding upon all the cells in it, it went ahead and said it must be a figure. And it drew a big figure box around it, and it sits there waiting for you to put in alt text, okay, for this figure that's actually a table. And so what's that's a case where the software is really confused about the nature of the content, and it's begging for help. Well, it's not very good at saying it, okay? And the software, it's confused itself, and it's imagining that this content is all about being a figure, because it decided there are lines on the outside of it, and so it made some dumb decision that what it's looking at is a figure, an image, or a collection of vector art, and instead of being table structure. And likewise, the software makes the other error. So in this case, in this screenshot that I have here, um, we have what there really probably should be here is that this whole thing is an image, a figure, I should say, and then it gets alt text, because there's really no good way to tag each and every one of these little images and then tag each and every one of these little pieces of text and make it all hang together in a way that presents a meaningful, navigable piece of content to an AT user. It's not going to, this content is resistant to that. Okay, because PDF UA didn't tell people how to author content. It only says how to tag the content. It actually shows up in a PDF. And characteristically and typically, you want to go ahead and tag for what the author is attempting to represent. Now, I realize that I probably picked a bad example in this flow chart, because I suppose when you look at the chart, you could say to yourself, there's probably a way to tag this sensibly. And maybe there is, all right? But you still wouldn't be, but the semantics of the chart are probably contained in a description of the chart rather than in a line by line rendering of the text of the chart, right? Because that's probably not going to necessarily help somebody. Instead, the chart is probably going to be more accessible if it gets alt text. Unfortunately, because it's a flow diagram, lengthy alt text that describes what the flow is that's represented in this particular document. So PDF UA, it's really about distinguishing artifacts and real content, making sure that only the stuff that is tagged is the stuff that the user needs to read as part of their document experience. Using the correct semantics, distinguishing between headings and tables and paragraphs, or as the example that we went through, distinguishing between components within a list item. Okay, as without those components, the user has doesn't necessarily have the opportunity to find out exactly where they're supposed to be in this document, or what they're looking at, what they're reading. And then to ensure correct reading order, and this is important to mention, because documents come in all kinds of flavors, where they do skip pages, or they're running down a column and then they skip over to another column on the other side of the page. Frequently, there are also issues with, you have to make a decision about where does this image appear in the flow of content, and specifying that order, getting that order correctly, is also semantically important. So the PDF UA flag is a formal claim that that you have checked for distinguishing artifacts from real content, that you're sure that you're using correct semantics, and that the reading order is valid. And when you add the PDF UA flag, you are assuring the end user downstream there, the reader, the person with the AT device, who in principle would open up that PDF and they would see that UA flag, and they would sigh in relief and say, okay, my AT is going to be able to do a decent job on this thing, because somebody did a good job, and they actually went ahead and all the way to the gold standard and made this thing PDF UA conforming. So, and so let's sort of roll this back to some general advice for remediation. First of all, and this may be something that I'm guessing you probably already well know these things, so I'll run through them quickly. You always want to fix the source file if possible. Well, of course, what I should have said there was, when you fix the source file, it really matters fundamentally if you can use that source file to generate a tagged PDF, instead of just making any old PDF and then tagging it afterwards. It's usually much preferred to tag that PDF, have that PDF tagged when it's first created, and then do your fix-ups. A good friend of mine in the industry, it likened a PDF, okay, to a loaf of bread. You bake that loaf of bread, and now here it comes, nice hot steaming loaf of bread. And if you tag it though, once you've made it, it's kind of like trying to take a loaf of bread and recycle it and rebake it into another loaf of bread. I, it doesn't work very well. You can grind it down into breadcrumbs, but you can't really get it back into flour. PDF is the same problem. So fix the source file if at all possible. Tag for semantics, excuse me, tag for semantics, not for encoding. Don't accept whatever the checker sees. If it sees a figure when it's a table, you got to tag it as a table. If it sees list items with no label, and it's an ordered list or a definition list, it's much less important for an unordered list. Why is that less important? Because the bullets, number one, the bullets when they're voiced, they always sound very distinctive, you know. But and they indicate the beginning of something. But mostly they don't actually convey real information. They're relatively harmless. It's ordered lists and unordered and definition lists that's really important to have label tags discriminated from the L body. So you tag the semantics, not the encoding, and then for authors, ask them to do. They're basically they should really focus already. You could say that one way to say it is that authors should focus on 5 things fundamentally. They should be sure to use styles in their authoring application instead of inline styling. No more using like font size changes and boldface to indicate semantics. Instead, use styles to indicate semantics so that they're consistent. And this creates a much cleaner, better looking document, and it results in a properly tagged PDF without all the aggravation, or much less. Use those styles consistently. So it's not okay to simply use an H2 tag, use an H2 style here, but the next time you want to do H2, you go ahead and use a font size of 18 and you make it bold. Right? That's inconsistent. There's no reason to expect that any software would have a chance of tagging that correctly. Styles drive, or most software use styles to drive the tags that get generated on output. Authors are by far the best people to be providing alternative text for the semantic images in their documents. I used to own a service bureau that would do document tagging. We were like one of the first in the world to do this back in almost 20 years ago. And we would get these documents from these government agencies and academics. They would have these technical diagrams in them. And well, they weren't used to the request to say, hey, could provide us with a description of your diagram? They usually left it up to us They usually left it up to us to do it. They shouldn't have done that. We didn't know, why should we? We're not experts in their subject, right? So we couldn't do justice to it. So authors should provide alternative text for semantic images. As I mentioned earlier, use software that creates tagged PDF directly. If you print to a PDF, you basically get a pretty picture of a page there with some text on it and some images. You get no organization and no structure. You don't get the features in the PDF that make it accessible. So it's far more preferable to use software that generates tagged PDF at the outset. And as I mentioned earlier, it really, genuinely is true. The software developers change their software first and foremost based upon feedback they get from end users. That's how they know what's bugging people, what's taking up a lot of time, what's generating complaints and service requests and calls to support. And existing customer complaints about software are usually the top level thing that needs to get fixed when they're sitting around in that Friday afternoon meeting deciding what you're going to do next week. It usually, I can tell you this because I've been part of many software companies, it usually has to do with what the customers were complaining about that week. So if 4 or 5 people decide that they just hate this broken feature in Microsoft Word or Corel something or whatever it is, get 5 or 6 people together and submit a very similar comment or bug report along those lines. You will get a software company's attention, even a large software company, and it genuinely will have positive results. And strongly encourage that. So that's there you go. Wow, that was 48 minutes from me. So happy to take happy to take any questions that you have.
Okay, my name is Molly, and I'm going to chime in. I was sitting here working through a document happening to be converting a number of Google Docs to Word docs and then exporting to PDF, of course. And some of the things that you were mentioning, and I'm still getting really new to the whole process. As a result of Peter's wonderful training, he put us through lots and lots of opportunities to learn and get some hands-on experiences. It's just, as you say, something to the extent you mentioned that PDF UA is for creators of web content or the tools that we use. It's not necessarily for us, but how do we really know? I mean, is there a tool out there that is the most accurate at this point that we can use, that we can make sure that we are meeting the needs of the users that come to our documents?
So I'm, as I mentioned to Peter before, I'm in a difficult position in terms of recommending specific software. And the reason for that is that I have a particular position. I'm the executive director of the industry association, and one of the things that they definitely don't prefer me to do is talk about this vendor's software instead of that vendor's software, right? So in a way, I'm useless for your question. Here's what I would say. I'm happy to say the following thing. There are 3 tools right now that seem to occupy the bulk of the remediation marketplace these days. One of them is, of course, Adobe Acrobat Professional, or Adobe Acrobat. Still don't call it professional anymore. That you know about. Common Look makes tools that also deal with remediation and with validation. And then there's PAC3, which is a PDF Accessibility Checker 3, which is a free tool available from developers in Switzerland. They're also, and they make a variety in their commercial guys, they make other tools as well. All 3 of these tools are very helpful. They don't all overlap completely, and it'd be I think a bad idea for me to try and get into the particulars of how they don't overlap here. But all of them, at the end of the day, provide a similar facility, which is that they create a workplace where you can do the checking that a human needs to do, right? Are the semantics correct? Is the logical order appropriate? And in all of these tools, or in any tool, frankly, that can assist you in remediation or validation, as you scroll, all these tools have a means of providing you a visual representation of the layout of the text as it would come out of the PDF file in an accessibility context. I should mention another tool too, called, if I'm mentioning the other ones, called PDF Go HTML, which is a free plugin. It requires Adobe Acrobat. It doesn't work without Adobe Acrobat, that tool. In all of these tools, they have the ability to allow you to essentially highlight the first tag in the first page, then hold your finger down on the down arrow, and then watch a little highlight scroll through the whole document, stopping, or the little highlight bounces around, shows you the logical order, and then the different, either it'll be colors or the names associated with the highlight tell you about, is it a heading, is it a paragraph, and so on and so on, right? And the human part of this, and all the tools will show you the same problem or the same thing, just with slightly different look and feel to the interface. The whole thing is to see, are the semantics correct and is the ordering valid, right? So I certainly can't tell you that. I can tell you that Pack 3 does a couple things that Acrobat doesn't, and Acrobat has a couple interactive aspects that Pack 3 doesn't. And then there are some people will really prefer one versus the other, or one of them has a Mac and the other one has only Windows only, right? But at the end of the day, the really important thing that they do is they give you the ability to see, to visualize, and quickly scan through the semantics and the ordering, and determine whether or not this file is in good shape. And then they do other things as well. But that, I think, is the biggest thing. And all the tools that deal in remediation will have that feature to some extent. The preview, the ability to preview the structure. So hopefully that's helpful.
Hi, this is Susan, and I guess I just would like to make a comment, maybe a request to the PDF Association. When I come across something, I get something unique in dealing with remediating a file, is I'm looking for the correct way to do it. And I spend a lot of time researching that. It would be really nice if the PDF Association had sample files, so if I was doing footnotes or endnotes, or you were talking about the definition list. Well, what do I do with the definition list if I actually have blue words within the document that send the user to the definition list? What would be the way to handle that? And so to me, the PDF Association would be my first place to go to look for those sample files for the correct way to tag these things.
So the PDF Association did publish what it calls the PDF UA reference suite. It's in the resources section on our website, and it has, I think, 11 different files in it that are of varying levels of complexity. That represent, shall we say, canonically correct, or that represent ideal tagging for a variety of situations, but not for all. So your example is an excellent one. You have text that links off to a location in an index, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's an interesting case because honestly, the solutions in current generation technology for that are poor. There's the only way to do it right now at all really is to provide a link on that text that heads off to the page where the definition is. And that's it. That's all you can get today, current generation software. PDF 2.0, which has been published, which is under development by a number of different companies, and Adobe is just Adobe now supports 2.0, they say. PDF 2.0 adds new functionality that will permit far richer usage of things such as going backward and forward through links, so that you could go out, so that you could in fact take that link and aim it directly at the exact definition over there in some other page, and then a user with their AT they would follow a session kind of orientation to be able to return to the place where they had followed that link. So sometimes I think I shouldn't mention this stuff because I can't tell you about software that's available right now that does exactly that, right? It's not very helpful to you. But these are, so you picked an excellent example, which PDF technology does a poor job on at the present point in time. Okay. Um, the and that might be part of the reason why you probably won't find that example in the PDF UA reference suite, but you will find a bunch of other examples. And to be honest, to be fair to us in a certain way, there are so many different things that people can and do that people do in documents, that we would be hard pressed to come up with a reference suite that would accommodate all of them. Uh, but that is an objective, and in fact, the association is developing right now it has a liaison working group developing PDF examples for WCAG that we hope will be used in the context of the WCAG techniques content. But so I take your point, and that there are many more and better examples of that could be delivered. And in terms of the particular example you mentioned, the only thing I can suggest today is that you add a link, and users will. AT users are not unfamiliar with this. They accommodate links that transport them across a PDF file fairly routinely today. But it doesn't mean that it's not particularly easy, and I can't pretend that it is.
Thank you.
So I know we've only got a couple of minutes left. If there are more questions, I don't know if, Duff, if people email me some questions, if they still have some, would you mind if I just email those to you and then I can send any response back to the group? Or
Yep, I'll do what I can.
Awesome. And I just wanted to kind of ask a couple of questions real quick right at the end for kind of knowing where most of the people in our group are at in terms of what they've been trained in. And so I'm wondering, all of them should be familiar with the tag tree and with at least some of the more common tags. But I know I've had a hard time at times learning about some of the more obscure tags that are out there and when and where they should be used. So do you know of a good place where people could go to learn more about the appropriate tags? And because I mean, even things like, until I was using PAC3 to scan some of my documents, I didn't realize that every time I was creating a PDF with tags, it started out with a section tag rather than something like a document tag, and it would kind of flag me for something like that. And so an easy place to find that, and then maybe just your recommendation for some of those next steps for somebody who's really been passing like an accessibility checker that's built in. They know about tags, they know about reading order, and they know about artifacting, but like what would the next step be for somebody who's trying to bump up their game, in your opinion, beyond contacting the software developers, which I think is a great thing that we can all do right away, even,
Right away, every day, 2 times a day. I mean, it's it's really significant how these development teams feel starved of input and for information, seriously, from end users who just take the time to step up and learn where that form is to send that information. So, well, 2 things I'll say is that the documents, the PDF Association is about to publish, I would say it'll come out in about a month or so, a document which is a best practice guide to tagged PDF syntax. What it is not is a guide that helps you determine which tag to use. It is a guide that is intended to help you in the best use of the tags that you're using. Okay. The definitions of the tags are all given in a document that is free, but complex. And it's another one of these hideous developer-oriented documents. It's actually the ISO specification for PDF 1.7, which is it's old. It's from 2008. But it is the document that defines the generation of PDF technology that all of you are using right now to do your tagging. And So there are, and I'm thinking I could call out the specific tables in that document which give these definitions that tell you, that specify this is a note, this is a note element. I mean, in there, if you looked in there, for example, you'd find that note says nothing about footnotes, or excuse me, note says nothing. It is about footnotes. It's not about a note that's just in the middle of the body text, right? That definition is given, although tersely, and it's not very easy to read, but that definition is made clear in ISO 32000 Part 1, which is this free document available from, you can download it for free from Adobe.
Okay.
So it's fair, though, that there's a discussion, like a general purpose discussion of the appropriate use of each structure element. It's sort of like the way we would probably begin our tag PD, our next best practice guide after the semantic one or the syntax one. So I don't actually, as I sit here, I know there are several different resources online about tag PDF. This is a gentleman, Kenny Moore. Kenny's got a great site that includes a lot of stuff, but maybe not that particular discussion. And so I actually, that's a good idea, and somebody, and probably we, should publish a discussion about what these structure elements are for, common misapprehensions about them, and so on. So, for example, as per my example, as in my list there, I mentioned label tags. Some people think of them as only mattering in the context of lists, but actually the definition says it's just a label. So another appropriate use of label tags is for the indicator in a footnote, right? So you have the little number 1 in your text, and then over down in your footnote you have a little number 1 followed by the footnote text. But that little number 1 in the footnote should be wrapped in an LBL or a label tag. And in fact, if everybody did that consistently, it would make much richer navigation of these documents possible by AT. Full compliance to PDF UA would imply a label tag on the label in a footnote, but that is not information that you would easily find. So you've given me a great idea for a new doc for how to start off the tag PDF best practice guide for tags, and I appreciate that. Which is another way of saying I don't have it ready to hand to be able to give you now.
No problem.
That's a good point, as it really is.
Great. All right. Well, I know we're 5 minutes over already, so I just want to thank everybody for coming out and taking the time to join us. And I really want to thank you, Duff, for taking the time to share with us more about PDF.
You're very welcome.
All right. Well, hope you guys all have a great afternoon, and we will catch you later.
Take care.